Now, on the 27th of April, South Africa celebrated Freedom Day, which marked a quarter of a century since the historic vote that ushered in democracy. Now, during these 25 years, much has changed in the economic and social sphere of the nation. The 25 Years of Nation Building to Transformation report has looked at very many ways in which transformation has been achieved by the highlight of the necessity of the triple BEE policy and the role it's played in the growth of South Africa. For more on this, I'm joined in the studio by Israel Noko, the founder and CEO of NPI Governance Consulting. We were talking just before then, you think sometimes the debate around transformation and empowerment, it tends to be negative and tends to be confrontational. What do you think the problem is there?
I think the problem primarily is that we've been fixated around ownership. And ownership is quite a sticky subject. You know, at the beginning of our transformation era, you know, the emphasis was really around, you know, how do black people participate in the economy, and ownership was the kind of identified area to focus on. And with that came the kind of suspicions that, well, companies have to give away shares, and it created a lot of bad feeling, you know, amongst private sector. But what we want to do in this report that we've actually just recently issued is to try and change the narrative. That there is actually been quite a few success stories when it comes to transformation, but many of them are below the radar. Many of them are not household names, and many of them don't capture the headline news. So the whole point around this journey is that, you know, transformation has really been about a journey, and we've really wanted to focus in and zoom in on those success stories and take those as the next phase of learning from those last 25 years of our democracy, how to improve transformation.
What do you think are the tough lessons that have been learned?
Well, I think the tough lessons is, first of all, on the fronting issue. I think, you know, now that we're in the full phase of transformation, we need to start to see the BEE Commissioner being really proactive about really enforcing criminal sanctions against directors as well as companies that don't do it in the intended way. And I think that's the first thing that we need to see. The second thing I think we need to start to kind of have a dialogue on is to really try and encourage young people from job hopping in the markets. There's been a lot of that over the last 15 years where people ultimately get poached, and they stay in a position for about 2 years, and then they get poached into another position. What that ultimately does for their careers is that it actually destroys them because they don't build up any capacity for any expertise.
But what can you do about that? Because on the two sides of that argument, you've got managers who have got to tick their boxes and fill in their scorecards.
Right.
On the other side, you've got young guys who want a better future, and as I say, the promise of 25 years ago, I want to double my salary, triple it maybe in 5 years. How do you stop people from taking advantage of that?
Well, you can't really stop anyone from, you know, moving on if they want to move on. But I think one of the things that we've seen over the last 3 years is that we started to see less and less of that proliferation of job hopping. I'm finding that a lot of people are beginning to take a long-term view of their careers as well as how transformation can benefit them, and staying put in their positions. And, you know, especially as we're going through these tough economic times, people are not really too keen on jumping ship because there's a reality and a possibility that whatever position they go into, retrenchments or downsizing is a real possibility. So people are now beginning to stay put, which is a positive thing.
But sadly, I think it's also a reflection on the economy, I think, to an extent.
That's
There
right.
are fewer opportunities opening up.
Yeah.
But also, having said that, though, I mean, we're talking 25 years after. Don't you think, though, that some industries, and I've been obviously studying this economy for the last 25 years, is that some industries have transformed with just by the natural. I mean, even in our business, you look at radio stations, television stations, they are now packed with young black professionals.
That's right.
And it would just happen naturally. Isn't that going to happen over time, though?
Yes, I mean, that's the whole point. I think, you know, it's again, I have to emphasize that transformation is a journey. It's not an event, and then it's not going to happen just now. It's going to be intergenerational. So it's wonderful to see successes in a certain number of key industries. But I think where we need to start putting a lot of support behind are those technical industries, those industries where there's a lot of qualifications that's required and a lot of years of, you know, service that's needed for those individuals to be able to participate in a meaningful way. We're only beginning to see that now. I mean, remember when the codes of good practice were gazetted back in 2006? 2007. 11 years later, we're only now beginning to see, some of the kind of real benefits of some of those things. So I think, right now, I think we are meant to be where we are right now. But, let's have this discussion in about 5 years' time, and I'm going to definitely tell you a different story.
But one of the problems I think you're up against in trying to get this positive narrative going is the fact that I've read more stories about fronting in the newspapers than I think I can even remember.
Yes.
And some of them are absolutely, in my view, childishly naive, shall we say, thinking that you can get away with it.
Yeah.
But how many people have been punished? How many people have been censured by the authorities for it? Probably very few.
Yes, and unfortunately there's been very few prosecutions as such. Just remember that only in 2014 did BEE fronting become criminalized. So as a result of that, the entity that's allowed to actually commission any investigation is the BEE commissioner. And once she has actually found that there is some possibility of fronting, then it's up to the special investigations unit to then really prosecute in this regard over there. The challenge that we have right now is that in those institutions, there is a lack of capacity. And because fronting has become a lot more sophisticated, it's moved away from just hiring the garden boy or the domestic help to making them a director. It's become a lot more structured and sophisticated. Clever lawyers and accountants are able to put deals together that would appear to be actual BE happening, but in actual fact it's fronting. We need to build up those capacities. So I think right now what we're beginning to see right now is that the BEE commissioner is putting a bit of stick about, and in actual fact has put a wrench in a lot of these BEE transactions right now, and it's really game on in terms of trying to really question companies' intentions in terms of demonstrating their commitment towards transformation.
But my question is, it's the same thing as fraud. Well, I know it is fraud. Same thing as fraud. Until you start putting people behind bars for 5 to 10 years,
that's right.
No one's going to take it seriously, and they're going to do it again.
Yes. In fact, there have been 2 cases. About 2 years ago, there was a infamous PROSA case when there was a lot of investigations around the locomotive trains that were supplied to PROSA, and there was a company that was actually found guilty of fronting. And the good news about that is that the judge, in that case, actually gave a much more clear definition of what fronting was. It wasn't just the act of it, but also the intention of it. So we've only seen 2 court cases that I'm aware of, one with a PROSA case and one with another kind of overseas engineering company, but that's way not enough, from that perspective. I think we need to see some real penalties, being enforced. We need to see directors going to jail, and once we start to see that, then people will start to take this thing very seriously.
I mean, how likely is that it's ever going to happen, though? I mean, the other day we were discussing the Constitution after 25, and they say it's the best, most brilliant Constitution the world's ever come up with, but often it's not followed through by the legislative and by the legal system. Isn't this the same case?
Well, yes, it is. But I mean, the good news is that about 2 weeks ago, the BEE commissioner, as you will know, has been investigating into some of these BEE trusts. And recently, she's just said that, she is going to be publishing a list of companies that have not met their compliance. Now, this is just the beginning. I mean, this is the part where companies will be named and shamed. And of course, reputationally, this can actually break some companies and maybe force some companies to do something about that. So
when are you going to do this?
Well, we're anticipating this should happen within the next 2 to 4 weeks. Government, of course, has to go through a publication process, but once that gets gazetted, you're going to see some interesting names, and some directors also being named and shamed.
Well, us in the business world will be watching very, very carefully. In fact, we'd like the names before you publish them. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
That was Israel Noko, the founder and CEO, NPI Governance Consulting.